Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for today's webinar about working remotely. I'm Drew Webb with the Alumni Association, and this webinar is actually the fourth webinar we produced this semester. You can view our previous webinars, as well as about 20 others, by visiting our alumni website, vuconnect.com/career. And while you're there, make sure to check out some of our other career resources, including the Career Advisor database, where you can search through over 8,000 alumni who have volunteered to help with career-related advice. Today's webinar will last around 45 minutes, and please feel free to type in questions into the question box as you have them, and we will make sure that these get addressed. We are recording the presentation today, and we'll send you a link to that recording later this week. Our presenter, Jeremy Payne, has the unique distinction of being a triple-door, having earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in 2000, a Master's of Education in 2002, and a Doctorate of Education in 2006. He is currently Head of People Operations for Remote Year, where he equips a global staff of remote workers with the tools, resources, and support they need to be successful in their roles. Along with his wife, Alexandra, Double-Door, Jeremy calls Nashville, Tennessee home. Jeremy, thanks so much for being here with us today, and I'm pleased to turn over the presentation to you.
Thanks so much, Drew, and thank all of you for dialing in. I'm really looking forward to spending the next few minutes with you, share a little bit about what I know around this topic of location-independent productivity, and hopefully answer any questions you might have at the end of our presentation. But to jump right in, I really appreciate Drew spending time introducing me. I want to just tag on a few more points. More personally, so the slide I'm showing you now has a photo of myself and my wife, our two dogs. Notice that hat is on there for scale. In the bottom left, you see a picture from our wedding, and then you see our newest addition to our family, another remote worker there, our child, Margaret, who is 9 months this week, so we're excited to have her added to our family. But the big takeaway here is you can listen to me because I run people ops at Remote Year, or you can listen to me because I've studied this topic for a while, or you can listen to me because up in that top right-hand corner, my wife and I took a drastic jump in life 3 years ago, and we sold everything we own. We hit the road with our jobs. We called ourselves the Vandy Vagabonds, and we toured the U.S. Working full-time, location independently, while also traveling around to wherever we wanted to go. And so that picture you see of the two of us in the top left is actually taken in Acadia National Park right after we had finished some work for the day. The other piece that I wanted to bring up is that I've been very lucky over my 18 years of work that 11 of those years I've been able to work remotely, and 6 of those 11 years I've been location independent. And I'm very, very passionate about not just keeping that trend for me and my life and my family, but also helping others understand what that means and how they can bring this new style or this new way of working to their lives. So with that said, let's jump in. Always find it helpful to talk a little bit about the history of work. Everything is cyclical at the end of the day, and this is no different. So a brief note here. One of my favorite books on this topic is a book called Cubed. It's by an author who is called Nickel Saval. And Nickel does an excellent job of exploring the history of work and what brings us to today. And I just briefly wanted to share a few highlights to set the stage. So it's important for us to know that white-collar work is a fairly modern creation. It didn't really exist through the 1800s. It was only at the tail end of that century where it came into fashion. Most of the offices of that time were very small, maybe a few dozen people total. There were clerks, and managers, and partners, and everyone sat near and next to each other, mixed up, intertwined in these open office environments. That might sound familiar to you, as a more recent trend in office design is indeed open office, but just so we're all on the same page, we're actually coming back to that. We were doing open office in these small offices all the way in the early 1900s. Everyone at that time dealt with spoken word. There wasn't a lot of paper. There wasn't a lot of communication not done verbally. And that's what really ruled the roost there. One of my favorite quotes from the book is that, quote, "The distance between a junior clerk and a partner was both seen as enormous and easily surmountable." Everyone saw how those offices worked. They knew how to get there. It seemed daunting, but everyone was on the same team in these small open space offices. And then come along the national railroads, the steel industry, and the coal industry, and starts to uproot this idea of white-collar work in an office. We went from a lot of generalists on a on a career path, sharing an office to hundreds and hundreds of specialized workers in addition to the generalists that were there. At the same time, there were two inventions that were happening. One, the telephone, which allowed people to then have access to information verbally, but away from their current state, so not side-to-side chatter, but across different companies and locations. And then the other is the typewriter, which enabled the written form of communication to be done in a way that could be done quickly, effectively, and efficiently. So here we have this stage setting of offices becoming bigger, offices reaching outside their own doors for information management, and offices using more than just voice to connect all this together. Along this same route comes a movement of work in cities specifically, and city real estate was getting expensive. So buildings were built upward instead of outward. We're seeing this in Nashville, for example, right now. Just like the buildings being built up, document storage is being built up. One of my favorite examples of this is the vertical filing cabinet versus the horizontal filing cabinet. And then, of course, the natural next step would be to put our human resources, our people, these generalized and specialized workers, in similar structures, and that's how we came up with cubes. So this idea of living and working in a cube came out of about 50 years of evolution of the white-collar workspace in the US. Now let me fast forward. Three things have happened more recently that are driving a new trend. The first is the corporate ladder is no longer. If you think about 1950s workers, you could expect a white-collar worker to have maybe 5 work experiences, maybe 5 different companies at their career. But if you look at a current career professional, we're looking all the way up to 20, 25 different experiences. I think the mean is closer down to a dozen, but the high end there continues to increase, these short episodic works where your skill set is portable. In addition to the corporate ladder switch, the second big move here is access to internet. Seems like a no-brainer, but internationally, internet access has really only ramped up for a digital nomad or a global professional in the past few years. And then third, and equally important, is the generation that's entering the workforce. I know many of you have heard about millennial mindset and millennials seeking experiences over standard work or traditional work environments. Gen Z is coming into the workforce now too, the low 20s, coming out of school and wanting more stable work, but wanting flexibility in how they do that work. So all of these factors have come together to create new ways of working, and one of those new ways of working is indeed a location-independent work style. So what does this future of work look like? Clearly, this is what it looks like to be uncubed, right? This is what everyone thinks when we think about uncubed, traveling the world, doing work from wherever. The reality is still great, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more like this. You are uncubed, but you're just choosing where you work. So you might be in a coffee shop, you might be in a park. You might want to keep that hammock though, because you'll use it a lot and it's small and portable and you can take it with you wherever you go. I think a next step for us would be to define a few terms. You've heard me throw out a few of them already, but there are some really interesting terms in this new future of work and way of working. And so here are the ones I'd like to highlight. We just talked about traditional workspace. So this can mean anything from an office building to a cube farm to whatever you want to connect that to, but it's how we have worked in the past. Remote working, as a term, is someone who works outside of the main office. A lot of people think remote working is telecommuting, and that is one form. However, you can work remotely in a satellite office, you can work remotely from a field base. So remote working just means away from the main entity of working. Telecommuting is the one that most people subscribe to, that work from home idea, with the telephone we mentioned earlier creating that possibility along with dial-up internet in the early days, and now of course everything to fiber in our homes. A distributed workforce is becoming more and more popular. There are hundreds of companies in the US that do this already, but distributed workforces are workforces that have workers, employees, staff, contractors, consultants in multiple locations. A fully distributed workforce is a company that has no headquarters, no office. The company I work for right now, Remote Year, is a fully distributed workforce. We do not have a single building that we own or operate where people go to work. A digital nomad is another term that's gained a lot of popularity in the past few years. This is simply digital broken down, meaning works on the internet for their job, and nomad meaning traveling constantly. So you'll see a lot of efforts and resources out there on the internet for digital nomads, people who make their living through internet-based businesses or work and are always traveling. And I want to contrast that with the topic for today, which is location-independent professional. These are people who might have a home base. They might work from a beach. They might work from a hammock. They might work from a cube. They might work wherever they want to work. And that's the point, is that the location where you're doing your work does not impact the work you are providing. Again, most of these people have a home base. In the RV world, we call them sticks and bricks. If you ever hear that phrase, you'll know we're just talking about the home. Well, that usually is much smaller but has a bigger driveway to accommodate our RVs. And then two other terms that you might hear that are becoming more and more useful. One is geo-arbitrage. Both digital nomads and location-independent professionals use geo-arbitrage. This is the idea of working for a company that is in a high-paying market while living in a location that has a cheaper cost of living. And you can build out a pretty strong year if you plan on where you want to travel based on your income, where you can come out net ahead than any traditional job you might have based here in the States. And then last but not least, a visa run. When you are traveling, it's important to know that each country has its own limitations on how long you're allowed to be there, but there are a lot of ways around that, and one of these is a visa run. So it's not uncommon to hear digital nomads or location-independent professionals jumping across a border for a day or two to reset their visa before they return back to their destination. So a couple terms there for us to just keep in mind as we talk about the rest of our presentation today. But I want to jump right into, so who can do this? Who can do this thing called location-independent productivity? And the answer is a lot more people than you think. The estimates out there, by 2020, a lot of companies are reporting that 50% of their employees would have the capability of working from home. I'm going to repeat that because I find this fascinating. By 2020, in 3 years, 50% of all roles would be able to be worked from home. And this is by a group called the Global Leadership Summit who did this study. In most white-collar jobs, another way to look at this is most of us are already working from home anyway, in some respect. How many of you take your cell phone home and answer an email or two at home? How many of you pull that laptop open in the morning before you head into work just to see if there's anything to take? Or how many of you take a call in the car? We're all working to some degree like this already and proving that we can indeed accomplish our work that way. Now, who can do this is entirely different than who should do this. And for that, I think it's best to talk about what recruiters look for. So if you're interested in finding a location-independent job, here's what recruiters look for. We, of course, as recruiters, want to match the person, role, and the place. The place here being someone who is willing to travel. We also want people that are very autonomous. Working in a location independent world means you're likely going to be distributed and means you're going to be on your own. So you have to be comfortable working autonomously. Even when you're part of a team, a lot of that teamwork becomes autonomous work, then coming back to the team. Mastery and purpose are two other things. Those of you that are savvy in this world might notice that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are from Daniel Pink's work, and we in recruiting really use that work to drive our selection process. And the way that works for these location-independent professional roles is that we want someone who can work autonomously while also trying to get better and better at what they do and are driven by the purpose of the company that we stand for. Because you're distributed, you don't have the same drive to be connected daily, so you have to be attached to something higher, and we want your purpose to align with our purpose. This one is surprising to some people, but we actually want introverted work tendencies. We don't necessarily only want introverts to come work for us, but you have to have the ability to switch into introversion and out of it, depending on where you are and who you're around. Remember, you're going to be out there working alone most of the time, if not in small groups. Someone who is highly communicative, this is a huge competency for remote work. You have to be communicative. You have to be able to projectize your work, meaning taking chunks, getting it done, sending it back for approval. You obviously need a passion for travel or at least some type of mobility. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be international travel. You might want to do the RV in the US, like I spoke of earlier. You might want to just travel in your region, but the idea of wanting to move and keep moving while doing work is key. We also want proactivity. And then last but not least, we look for highly collaborative people. Now you might be saying that seems a bit oxymoronic, that you want introverted, autonomous people and you also want collaborative people. But at the end of the day, it's not. There are times when the work calls to be autonomous and there are times when the work calls to be collaborative. And we look for that interesting mix. Very hard to find. In prepping for this presentation, I was always intrigued to see what the interwebs make of the terms digital nomad and location independent professional and the pictures that are tagged this way. And this is one of those pictures. Of course, I've added the speech bubble here, but an example of a remote worker definitely demonstrating that autonomy and introversion here, sitting lonely on a bench while no doubt changing the world. Another way to look at this is this for you? Well, maybe, but what's in it for you? And does this sound attracting to you? So the first thing is work-life balance. Some people call this work-life integration. Some people call this work-life separation. The good news is when you're in a location-independent role, you can choose how you want to handle that because you own your calendar most likely. You also get autonomy. So those of you that just wish you had time in the day to accomplish what you need to accomplish, the good news is a location-independent lifestyle can give you that. Probably one of the bigger wins for this is keeping your resume active. I know a lot of people on this call, myself included, have had periods of quote-unquote consulting where we might be between jobs and are just trying to keep creating or keep providing benefit to customers during that time, but it might not be a full-time role. We're now in a world where you don't have to do that. You can take a full-time role on the road with you. You can travel with it. You can work it from anywhere. Personal productivity increases tremendously. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. But the other big benefit that a lot of people don't take into account is this is going to make you more creative. I mean, creativity is the connecting of ideas from disparate experiences, and what better way to be more creative than to expose yourself to different cultures, cities, ideas. So this is going to be a longer term gain, but one that often is overlooked while people decide if this is right for them. And then last but not least, there's huge cost savings. A ton of cost savings. I couldn't go down the list in the time we have, but here are a few examples. Makeup is a huge cost savings. Clothing, a huge cost savings. Probably my favorite cost savings is commuter benefit cost savings. So this gentleman here clearly not commuting, just hanging out at his local coffee shop. If you think about commuting as a sole benefit to making this decision, just roughly in Nashville, let's assume that you spend 1 hour a day in your car commuting. That's almost 200 days a year of commuting, or 8 days of your life per year that you will have spent in a vehicle commuting to and from work. I mean, I can't give you a better value proposition than get 8 days of your life back, either getting work done or spending time with your friends and family. But there's another party here we have to sell, and that's your company. So if it's your current company, that's great. If it's a future company, even better. But here's some ideas. So cost savings is a huge benefit to the company, and it might not be readily apparent, but let me give you an example. I had the pleasure for working for Bank of America over in Charlotte in the early 2000s, and one of the initiatives that we put into place at that time was something called My Work. The challenge being that the bank was growing very, very quickly. We had a lot of staff members and not a lot of space, believe it or not, in our high-rises there in Charlotte. And so we tried to come up with ways to accommodate this from a business strategy decision, and we ended up with 3 ways of working, or 3 working lifestyles. The first was a traditional lifestyle. You came in, you had a cube, you lived and worked in that cube, and then you went to your home and rinse and repeat each day. The second thing we did was build regional offices. So you could have the choice to go into a regional office. And by region, I mean still in Charlotte. So they were most like suburban offices. One was placed in north of Charlotte and one was placed south of Charlotte. So people could trim down their commute, still get their work done, and return home and save that commuting time and translate that into productivity. And then the third was a home office environment. We would give a home office setup stipend, and in exchange you'd be able to work from home. Now let me tell you how that results in cost savings. At that time, a cube in downtown Charlotte in a large building equated to around the $10,000 per year lease spend per person that had a cube. A regional office slot was about $7,000, and then a home office slot, even with the expenses of setting up a home office, only cost the company $5,000. So we actually created a business case for Bank of America to have more people work from home for saving money. We did not see a drop in productivity or any of the other measures I'm about to talk about, and that program is still going on today. The other one I want to highlight from this list is recruitment. And we spoke earlier about the generations in the workplace, but this has become a big deal. To attract people to your brand from an employment perspective is something we need to acknowledge. We need to be very proactive about as recruiters and as people operations teams. Millennial mindset's driven this, like we mentioned earlier, but Gen Z is knocking right at that door, and they want these flexible environments. So just be sure that if you're planning this for your company, or you're trying to position yourself in your company to have this potential to work location independently, there are a lot of great benefits to the company as well. But I do want to put a small pin in this conversation for a minute, because I clearly have a passion for this. I love working independently, but I also know that this isn't for everyone. So a couple of reasons why you might not want to work as a location independent professional. The first is, frankly, it gets lonely. You're out there working head down. Sometimes you're so passionate about the work you're doing that you don't realize you sat in a coffee shop surrounded by people and you didn't interact with a single person the entire day. You have to be purposefully interactive sometimes, otherwise it can get really lonely. Balancing work-life, integrating work-life is harder than you think. It takes work. It's not something that magically happens. So don't think that just by shifting to this kind of working lifestyle, it's going to automatically take care of itself. It needs as much planning as does, okay, I'm going into the office at this time and I'm coming home at this time. If you're not into digital technology, this will be bad news for you, but you have to embrace digital technology. Every communication form is done through the internet, through some type of digital technology. I'll share some of my favorites later in the presentation, but you have to be someone who embraces technology. You have to be proactive in communicating. I mentioned this earlier from a recruiting perspective, but if you're the kind of person who prefers to be given work, you turn that work around, you deliver it, almost consultative or consulting in an approach, this might not be the right kind of position for you. Working in a full-time role, location independent, you have to be very proactive in communicating. And then last but not least, the whole point of having this independence and this freedom to work from wherever is that you get to enjoy the moment. And I've seen time and time again, people get so interested in, well, where am I going next? That they're chasing this rainbow they just can't catch. And so if you're the kind of person that doesn't enjoy the journey and just wants to see what next, just give a real good think to see if this is what is the right next step for you. But for the rest of the conversation, let's assume this is the right step for you, and let me share with you some tips on how to do this. So starting with how to do this, I view this as three main mechanisms, and those are, you can start where you are, you can go find a new job that would let you do this, or you can make your own way. And I just want to spend a little bit of time about each of those three ideas. So in terms of starting where you are, I find it very helpful to just look at the objections you might get from your organization or for your boss. And these are the three that I hear all the time. The first being, you're going to be less productive. Now, an interesting note, there's a lot of research out there, and I'm sure that you have seen some of it your own. But there's a trend line that is starting to happen that says productivity is indeed higher when you're working away from a traditional office environment. Let me give you one example. There's a company in Singapore who did a 2-year study where they split their staff in half. And they said half of you work from home or from wherever you want to work. The other half of you work here in this office. After 2 years, when they went to look at their results, they found productivity gains in the group that worked from home equal to 1 extra day a week of productivity per person than compared to those that worked in the office. They attributed this mostly because there weren't as many distractions, people could focus, and people had to proactively ask for clarity in their work. That increase in productivity wasn't the only benefit, though. They also saw longer retention. People remained in their jobs longer. They saw that their employees were happier when they worked away from the office, which made their employees healthier, which, coming back to business case, reduced sick days, absenteeism, and saved a lot of money on their healthcare plan. So overall productivity, we are seeing a trend to the positive for people that are working away from traditional office environments. The second example here, it's not our policy. I have a personal example I'd like to share about this piece. I worked for a company, I took a role for a company that had a policy against telecommuting. And I was very passionate about the work being done, so I was willing to take a risk. But as part of my contract, when I joined that company, I made them put a clause in that said after 1 year, if I was performing well, they would let me have 1 day away from the office a week to work. So my 1 year came, I produced my document, I was performing fine, they let me take that day, my performance increased. Everyone on my team then was allowed to work from home, and 6 years later, that company now allows telecommuting and remote work. So you can also be a change inside. If it's not current policy, that doesn't mean it can't be future policy, and hopefully some of the information today will help arm you for that conversation. And then last but not least, the one I hear most often, particularly for managers, is how could you're a manager, you can't do this, you need to be here managing your people. And while there is a small amount of truth of that, depending on the organization, let me share with you some tips on managing remotely that you can then use to explain how you can accomplish this as a manager. So the first tip I have is to set consistent meeting cadences. We use a process called rock habits. If you're not familiar with rock habits, they come from Rockefeller and the habits that he utilized early on, and they've been adjusted over time to create something that enables startups or nimble organizations to use as a meeting cadence. And you can do a quick Google search, and rock habits is an excellent tool for that. I also recommend emphasizing the use of one-on-one meetings and skip-level meetings as a manager. Get those calendared. Make sure that there are known intervals and known cadences of meetings. A couple other quirky pieces here that don't necessarily happen in office but certainly need to happen in a virtual office is that you need to make celebrations an agenda item. At the beginning, that will feel awkward. But for instance, my team, we start every single meeting we have with a time to celebrate, and we embrace both work and life celebrations during that time. That's our time to be social with each other. In addition to the celebration, we have time to just talk as part of our agenda. That time is precious time together, and we want to make sure that when all of our voices are on the same call, we have time to learn a little bit more and share a little bit more about what's going on with each other. And then last but not least, distributed environments tend to be horrible at providing feedback, because the frequencies are stretched out in terms of communication. There might not be a centralized function controlling that. So make sure you put feedback as an agenda item when you're managing a remote team. 2 other quick tips. Check in outside of all of the scheduled meetings. Still add that spontaneity, that drop in. You can do that in a lot of tools. I've listed a couple here: Slack, WhatsApp, whatever works for you. And then last but not least, as much as we want to think that we can be as productive as possible without ever meeting in person, there is certainly a lot of value that's starting to demonstrate itself in the research around an in-person connection. Some companies do this through having the whole company get together once a year. We at Remote Year do this by having each team get together at least once a year in person. It's great for strategy, it's great for connecting, it's great for celebration, it's great for closing projects, and it's great for kicking off new exciting projects. Let's say that you can't convert your current role, so you need to find a new job. And there are a ton of ways to do that. Without going into a ton of detail on how to do it, I thought I'd show you where to go look for the job. This is a list of websites or resources that specialize in remote work jobs. FlexJobs is probably the most well-known. The job posts there are vast. They talk about location-independent jobs, remote jobs, but to post a job on FlexJob, an employer has to indicate how that job is a non-traditional job, not an office-based job. We Work Remotely is an up-and-coming site. A lot of the kind of core distributed companies use We Work Remotely, including ourselves, to post their jobs on. So if you haven't checked out We Work Remotely, make sure you spend some time there. Another one I'll call out from this list is AngelList. If you're on the startup side of the fence, we find a lot of benefit sourcing and matching through AngelList, which is a platform for people interested working in the startup world, sometimes whether that's as an investor, sometimes as an advisor, or even as an employee. And their protocol allows your company to be matched to individuals and vice versa, which can really help with sourcing. You as a candidate can take advantage of that because you can put a profile on AngelList indicating what you're interested in, indicating in the companies you're interested in learning more about. So you can either start where you are, you can find that job, or the third option that we're going to talk about is you can make something new. And I really would empower you to think about making something new. This is the way the new economy is happening. Most people that I know that live in this location-independent productivity lifestyle have a lot of side hustles, might have a contract gig on the side or two, and then have that main job. Remember, you get to control your calendar, you get to control your schedule, the flexibility is there. Or you can just go solo on your own. A couple examples I want to talk about. I have two very good friends here that decided one of them wanted to travel, but they didn't want to stop their real estate business. And so they created a company where at any one time, one of the individuals can travel and do anything digitally or administrative related to buying and selling homes, while the other one stays local to do all of the showings and anything needed to be done in person, including closings. And they rotate that responsibility. So at any one time, one of them is free to travel, while the other one can handle any in-person work done. Another example here, think about what you can do with your family. When we were RVing, we ran across so many families that were full-timing, meaning they were out and about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And one of the really unique aspects that we found were families willing to take a step down from this white-collar professional world in exchange for being able to spend that much time with their family and take on what is called work camping. So work camping has a lot of different forms, but a really clear example is if you go to a campground, the people that take care of the campground, the facilities, any of the campsite maintenance, those are usually full-time campers who, in exchange for having free parking for their RV or their camper, work for the campground itself. We had so many families that had great opportunities and great experiences doing work camping. So just another example of a non-traditional work solution in this world of location-independent productivity. So just to sum this up, try with the current job. If you don't like the current job or you're not getting any traction there, try to find a new role that is already location-independent. Or if you're more entrepreneurial mindset, look for something unique here. And at the end of the day, you're either going to build something, design something, or write something. Most digital nomads and location-independent professionals utilize the internet for their business. So put that brain to work. If you can't do it full-time, start that side hustle or that weekend hustle so you can use those examples when you do interview for a future role or create something. So with my time left here, I just want to highlight a few tools of the trade, and then we'll make sure we have time for any questions. What I want to start with are apps and software. So let's assume that you're ready to start this. Some of you might already be in location-independent roles, but here are a few tools that we find indispensable at Remote Year, and a lot of the people that I know that are out and about roaming also find indispensable. From a video solution, we find that a tool called Zoom is indispensable. We need a tool that works across countries, that works on various degrees of internet reliability, and Zoom is the tool for us for all of our video communications. You'll also see some really popular tools on there like Slack there on the top row, Airbnb as a way to find good lodging so you don't have to pay the hotel prices. Down on the bottom row, Google Maps works everywhere and works everywhere extremely well. So if you're ever looking how to navigate, even particularly over in Europe or in Asia around public transit, it is a lifesaver, and it could take any fear out of being able to navigate a city that you're not used to. The icon right next to the Google Maps is Yelp. Yelp over the past few years has turned into a powerhouse tool for digital nomads and location-independent productivity workers. There are reviewed sites for restaurants, coffee shops, locations where you can work, a really good tool. Of course, you see a couple others on there you might not be familiar with. In the second row, third over, you see the letter P. That is a virtual private networking app. One of the things you will find is that access to sites is restricted by country. And so if you find yourself traveling internationally and you need to do great work, either utilizing a company VPN or utilizing your own VPN is very, very helpful to get your work done. Also very, very helpful for that last icon on the page. If you want to play Spotify or catch up on Netflix while you're traveling in your free time, you might need a VPN to accomplish that. So in addition to that, clearly the #1 tool is coffee. You'll see us repeat coffee. You've probably seen coffee in every one of the pictures I've shared with you. But you need some hardware. My hardware of choice is here on the screen for you. I find that MacBook Pro is the best for me personally, though I know several digital nomads, depending on their role, will travel with PCs. IBM being a big player there still, Lenovo being a big player there still, and of course Microsoft with their Surface line being an ever-increasing player there. You'll need a good phone. The phone you have right now might not work, might not be the best choice. T-Mobile, if you happen to be a T-Mobile client, turns out they've got one of the best change your plan to plans for international travel. A lot of digital nomads will just stay on that T-Mobile plan. Fair warning, though, there are some stipulations to that plan, and T-Mobile has no problem shutting your phone off if you do not follow their protocols. The phone program that I found most successful for me is a program through Google called Project Fi. And this is a SIM card that you get. There are a few phones that it works well with, and it is a universal SIM internationally. So wherever you land on that plane or whatever boat you get off of, Google will tell you what your country rate for calling is and what your rate for data access is. And you don't have to physically change out a SIM card, which is a huge time saver if you've ever found yourself running through a town you're not familiar with trying to find a SIM shop. And then, of course, you can actually find SIM cards. We offer a remote year, all of our participants, the ability to buy into a SIM program where we'll have the cards ready for them upon arrival. We also utilize hotspots a lot. So these are small devices in addition to your phone that are purely for internet data access. It is not uncommon to see a location-independent professional carry all of these things in their bag. Other technology just to consider as we start to wrap up here. Headphones, vital. USB headphones, even though you'll have to channel your inner Madonna, by far the best in terms of sound quality. Laptop stands. In the top right, you see my favorite stand. It's a company called Roost, made here in the USA out of Colorado. I'm using a Roost stand right now to hold my laptop up. It collapses down to a small bar, but if you're into making sure your workspace fits you physically and you want to be able to rise and lower your laptop, a Roost laptop stand is great. Skipping down to the bottom, you'll see Chase Sapphire, Charles Schwab, and Simple. Those are 3 banking cards that work extremely well as you travel. They have very reduced fees or no fees at all, and they work in most of the countries where you live and operate. So all of this can be overwhelming. I recommend taking one off your list at a time, maybe starting with the apps, moving into the hardware, and then looking at your financing and figuring out what program best works for you as you move forward. And then, of course, what is a good digital nomad or location-independent professional without a slide about bags? So how are you going to carry all of this stuff? Well, most of us do what's called one-bag travel. There's a debate whether wheels or no wheels. You'll find that most people working this way do no wheels. They're easier to get on board. You don't have to check them as often. They fit in overhead compartments or under the seat much easier, and you're less likely to be identified as a tourist or a traveler. I've listed here a few of the companies I love. Manal is my go-to bag for travel. Tortuga was an early-in specialized bag just for digital nomads. Tom Bean out of Seattle is an amazing company if you're looking for durability, as is Red Ox out of Montana. And then last but not least, GoRuck if you're looking for an indestructible carry-all bag. These are all great companies for you to look into and see how to carry all your kit around. Probably the most important, though, you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but this is the new hierarchy of needs. We add Wi-Fi and battery at the end of this. So those of us roaming the world trying to get our work done, it's like the world is an airport and we're trying to find that one outlet and trying to get onto that one free access spot. This is the far most important component of what we do, and how you find that when you're out and about: coffee shops, cafes, libraries. Parking lots or parks near coffee shops and libraries where you can get on that internet. If you're traveling in the US, you're going to learn to love Walmart again because you can stay overnight and access their free Wi-Fi signal. And then last but not least, you can always add a hotspot to your cell plan. Here's an example of some offline work just to balance out the presentation here. A few case studies really quickly. Remote year we've talked about. We're really driven with global empathy, so if you come and work for us, you're going to be out and about traveling as well. There's very few home office roles with us. We do have them, but we expect that if we're going to be the best in taking professionals around the world, we want you to be the best at being a worker who can travel the world and get things done. Buffer, another amazing company, just so happens their head of people lives here in Nashville as well. They're fully distributed, just like Remote Year, and they are very much into a core value of transparency, radical transparency, what drives everything they do. So if you're interested in working for any of these companies, make sure you're identifying with the cultures here. We're all distributed, we all have goals. Buffers is radical transparency. And then a third that you'll hear an awful lot about is a company called Automatic. These are the WordPress people, and they rely on data to the point that they build most of their internal tools. So if you want to work for Automatic or a company like that, know that they're very data-driven, and so you need to adapt to that digital world of data and that digital tool set in order to be successful. So 3 very different companies, 3 very different core values, all 3 distributed in nature, all 3 supporting location-independent productivity. I do get asked a few questions, so I'm going to jump in real quick and answer those, and then we'll open it up, Drew, for any additional questions. But the questions I get most often, so I'm hearing about all these major companies reeling back in their remote workforces. Why is this happening? And usually Yahoo is cited. When Marissa Mayer came back on, more recently, IBM has been in the news doing this. Honestly, it's done for one of 2 reasons. One is either fear, and fear based on not knowing what people are doing when new leadership comes in, or it could be that companies want to reset on culture, and they feel like having everyone present and in person is the best way to do that in an expedited fashion. But both Yahoo and IBM have already started to send people back out into remote working capabilities. So even these major companies making these changes, they're best viewed as temporary and usually have a function behind them. I also get asked, isn't travel expensive? And the answer can be yes. But you, having location-independent freedom, have the luxury of 2 things. We talked about geo-arbitrage at the beginning of this conversation. The second is you can travel way in advance or you can travel last minute, and both of those ways of traveling are extremely less costly than trying to book in a normal 2-week window or for business travel. And then last but not least, what do you do about visas? For most of the world, believe it or not, if you're working for a company and you're traveling to a country where that company does not have a presence, you're going to be able to do that as a tourist. You may not have to take advantage of any visa issues. However, and a big asterisk on there, there are a lot of resources out there for you to check that and make sure that works for your industry and the role you're doing. My favorite resource for this one is a visa website. It's called visahq.com, visahq.com. You'll learn all about visas there, including Thailand's new 4-year digital nomad visa, a visa that will give you 4 years in Thailand, which is insane and great, and we're really excited to see that, as well as Estonia taking it even a level up and creating the world's first e-residency program. If you haven't researched into Estonia's e-residency program, that's a great way to get temporary residency in the EU by creating a company and working with the Estonian government to make that happen. I'm going to leave you with one piece of advice. If this lifestyle intrigues you, the best advice I can give you is just go. I got the job I am in today because I was sitting in an RV having my interviews with people who were looking for someone who looked at people ops differently, who was willing to travel, who had a passion for location-independent work. I was interviewing, sitting in the banquette in my RV in a national park, literally living the lifestyle, and that would not have happened if I was sitting in a home office or in an office environment. So if you think you want to do this, the best advice I can give you is just give it a try. And with that, Drew, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jeremy. That was a great presentation. One of the first questions we had come in was about the recording. So just a note about that, I will send, we'll upload this to YouTube, and then I'll send you a link to the email that you registered with so that you can access the recording moving forward. And another question that came in was, is there a platform like LinkedIn where you can easily find other location-independent business owners to connect with? This person is launching a virtual bookkeeping business, and it's going to be completely location independent, and she's trying to find some clients who are also working independently.
That's a great question. One of the best tools to use to connect with other business owners or other location-independent professionals is Slack. There are a lot of public Slack channels, one of them being Digital Nomad. So just do a quick Google for Slack channels, Digital Nomad, or location-independent professionals, and then join those channels. Most of them are free. Fair warning, there are a couple that are that have an annual fee, but they are well worth it. If you need more information, I'm sure that we can get a hold of you and send you some of those channels ourselves.
Are there any other questions? I was just going to ask a little bit more about Remote Year and kind of how your organization operates and what programs you offer.
Absolutely. So Remote Year is a company whose whole goal is to take individuals around the world and allow them to be very successful in the roles that they currently have or that the businesses that they currently run. The way we do that is we select cohorts of around 60 professionals and we take them for 12 full months, 30 days at a time, to 12 different destinations around the world. So on Remote Year, you might start in Split, Croatia, and then head to Prague, Czech Republic, and then jump over to Buenos Aires and Cordoba, Argentina, and then finish in Kyoto, Japan, over the process of that year. And in exchange for a monthly fee, we cover all of your transportation, all of your accommodation, your co-working space access, and all of your internet access needed to make sure you can do your job.
Great. Do you have any recommendations on utilizing co-working sites?
Absolutely. There are a couple larger companies in the world here that are doing a really good job of building great sites. One is called WeWork. If you're unfamiliar with WeWork, they are very similar to a smaller, intimate co-working space, but they replicate their process all over the world. So WeWork has a huge infrastructure. There are also the other extreme. There are small, what are basically mom and pop co-working spaces in most of the major cities throughout the US. We find that if you look at cities like the Nashvilles, so not necessarily the New Yorks or the LAs, but the Nashvilles, you know, the good, strong 2 million to 4 million person-sized cities in the countries around the world, they tend to have the best balance of cost effectiveness and co-working access and accommodation cost effectiveness. So a couple examples there, but WeWork is a great world-based version of co-working space. And then, of course, most local cities, that 2 million mark or above, are starting to have multiple co-working spaces run by local entrepreneurs.
Okay, here's another one. As a current people ops person, how do you think about career progression for your employees? What do people need to feel like they can have a career, not actually what do people need to feel like they have a career, not just a project to execute?
That's a really good question. One of the terms in there, career, is one that we struggle with, to be quite honest. We're in the process of putting right people in the right roles, but we also know that that word career implies that this will be where they stay. And we're not necessarily trying to make people stay in the role like we used to have long-term careers in one place. So the way that we look at career development at Remote Year is more of a lattice than a ladder. And by that, I mean we want to provide options and opportunities for people to move up, down, sideways. We want to support people that want to move outside the organization to a new role. So career development for us has become extremely holistic in our approach. In terms of the day-to-day, how we accomplish that, a lot of coaching. We have 3 full-time business partners on staff who are aligned to our major lines of business. Keep in mind, we only have 150 total employees, so it's a big investment for the company. But in return, we're able to keep a pulse on engagement at the individual level, what people want to do as their next step, and what the business needs, and we can kind of put and move people into those roles as they want and as we need to make sure that their experience stays both engaged and gives them a new opportunity to try something new as long as they want to be part of our Remote Year family.
Great. This person is a consultant who is location independent in terms of her business, but she's currently based out of a home office. She's considered traveling, but has 2 younger kids, so it seems daunting to her, and she was wondering what advice you would have for her.
Traveling with family is certainly more challenging. When we did our year on the RV, it was previous to Margaret joining us, so we only had our 4-legged friends with us, Rosie and Ramble. However, we met so many families that took that jump, and one of the ways that I can recommend you kind of putting your toe in is by looking at what you could do in your region or even just stateside. And then looking at other families that are doing the same. One example I'll give you is a family called Wandering Nation. Just do a quick Google search for their website, Wandering Nation. They are one of the families that I spoke of earlier that do a lot of work camping and have really figured this out. They know how to manage homeschooling. They know how to balance the time spent in formal education with all of the informal learning available to their children by being out in these campgrounds and in these amazing sites and these historical cities. So start with Wandering Nation and then look at their blog roll. They are connected to a ton of other families out there that can give you some great travel ideas if you want to take the big step and not just take yourself out there, but get your family on the road.
And last one, do you know like anywhere that like a list of companies that offer remote working opportunities is?
Yeah, what you'll want to look for is a list of companies that are distributed. If you go to those sites that I mentioned earlier, like Remotive or Remote OK, you will see their list of companies that post jobs there. You can also check out some of the more recent postings through Wired Magazine or Fast Company. They've started to do a lot of focal articles on companies that are providing these really unique spaces. The other thing I would put on here too is don't be too restrictive by looking for companies that position themselves as remote work, because as we started the conversation today, we're just a few years away from most companies offering some form of location-independent work and remote work. So really try to get aligned to that company as a starting point, and then you can always position yourself as, and the role that you're applying for as an independent, location-independent or remote work opportunity.
All right, well, it looks like that was everything. Thank you again, Jeremy, for the presentation, and thank you for everyone for joining us, and best of luck to everyone as you pursue remote working opportunities. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much.